Hello, everyone, both here and in cyberspace, and welcome to New Faces. And you may have seen, I'm excited to announce our new website, completely overhauled, and with a whole bunch of new offerings, platforms, and a lot more interactivity. And please send in your comments if you have any. If you check it out and you see any things that need tweaking, because now it's in a testing stage essentially, only for our insiders. And so please check it out, take benefit of it all. Okay, so the topic is good angels and bad angels. The forces in our lives. So how many of you believe in angels? That's the question. Statistics show, polls have been taken in the United States, and consistently 8 out of 10 Americans believe in angels. It's a pretty high number. I'm not sure what they mean by angels, which is part of the discussion. And maybe, like everything, like Levi Yitzchak Berditchev's classic response to the self-proclaimed atheist, that the God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. Maybe if we define what angels are, either we'll all not believe them or we all will believe in them. So really, we have to understand what angels mean. What exactly are angels? Are they white-winged elves flying around in the heavens? Or are they more sophisticated than that? Are they spiritual? Are they physical? And as we shall discuss, when you understand Judaism's universal approach to angels, what it called malachim in Hebrew, a radically different definition of what they are, will come away with understanding that angels are very much part of our lives, and they're not as mysterious and as so-called fairy tale and juvenile images that we may think they are. So, why the choice of this topic this week? Because, as I usually try to do, following the weekly Torah chapters, we're now in the book of Genesis, and we're in chapter Vayishlach, which I think is the 8th chapter. Yeah, the 8th chapter of the book of Genesis. And how does the chapter begin? Vayishlach means, and he sent. Who sent? Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim. Yaakov, Jacob sent Malachim, which literally is translated as angels, right? To what? To go check out what his brother Esav is doing. Just let's put a little context here. This is after 20 years that Jacob left his home in Beersheba due to the fact that after he had taken the blessings or stolen the blessings, so Esav wanted to kill him, as well as Isaac and Rebekah telling Jacob to go find a wife back from their hometown where Abraham originated, where Laban lived, and so on. So the last week's chapter of Vayetze was the story of Jacob's journey to a place called Haran. And then, from there, he built his family, his entire family, marrying first Leah, then Rachel, and all the tribes except one, Benjamin, wouldn't be born until he returned to Israel. And now, last week's chapter concludes that he's on his way back. V'Yaakov holach l'darkei, Jacob's on his way back after 20 years of oppressive years. They were very difficult years because he was dealing with a very shrewd, manipulative, conniving Laban. And now he's returning back to Israel. But now he still has to deal with some closure with his brother, his twin brother. And the question is, where does he stand? Does he still have the anger and wants to kill him? Or he can reconcile with him. So what Jacob does is he sends scouts, so to speak. He sends malachim. As I said, the literal translation is angels, but you'll soon see there's two meanings in it. To go check out what is happening with Esav. And they come back with not a good report. That Esav is marching to confront Jacob with 400 of his henchmen. The story continues, however, that Jacob then prays, prepares a bribe to appease Esav, and he prepares for war. And he splits up his camp. It's a whole episode which I've discussed in other years. Here we're going to be focusing on the angel aspect. And what happens next? That finally, when he does come to meet Esav, Esav's heart opens up, and the two brothers do reconcile. Whether they completely reconcile or partial reconciliation, but bottom line is they didn't go to war. So that was always that. But there's one small little episode within there where there's another angel comes into play. Besides the malachim that we just said that Jacob sent, which essentially were messengers to go check out what's happening with Esav, a little while later it says, after Jacob splits up his family and crosses over the river Yavok, and he goes back on the other side of the river because there were still some vestiges, some remains that he still wanted to bring over, small pachim ketanim, small containers, small jars. And when he goes there, he meets a stranger who begins to wrestle with him. And wrestles with him the famous story of Jacob wrestling with an angel. It doesn't say angel, it says a stranger, an ish. All night he wrestles with him until the morning when the angel has to leave, and Jacob will not let him leave unless he blesses him. And he blesses him that his name shall no longer be Jacob, and that's where Israel gets the name Israel. And who is this stranger? This is, as the Zohar, the Midrashim, and the commentaries explain, is Saran Shal. This is the angel, the guardian angel of Esav. So here we have another angel. So hence it's pretty appropriate. You don't have many chapters that talk about angels. Here's one that talks about two types. One, the ones that Jacob sends, and the one that represents Esav. So I thought appropriate to really try to decipher, demystify this concept called angels and malachim. So Rashi, the commentator, right in the beginning of the chapter, immediately says what it means, what do malachim mean? So this, he says two interpretations. Malachim mamish, which means literally angels. In other words, divine, spiritual angels. Or malachim as in shluchim, as in messengers. Human beings, because a human being, a messenger can also be called an angel. Now, as we know, when there's two interpretations of something, even though they may be different interpretations, but they have something in common, or else they wouldn't be sharing the same word. Because the Torah is very easily way of saying, when he wants to say a word that is a shliach, you could say shluchim, you can say meraglim, there's a lot of words to say messengers, or other ways that we find in the Torah. The fact that the Torah uses one word and it could be interpreted two ways tells us that there's something about a messenger and an angel, and there's something about an angel and a messenger, as we shall be discussing. And then, of course, there's the angel of Esav. So what exactly is this thing, angel? Angels, as we said, are very, for most people, it's like fairy tales. It's nonsense. Angels, who believes in cherubs or seraphim, seraphites, or other things like that. But as I mentioned, in the Western world, United States, 8 out of 10 people claim they believe in angels. Many claim that they have experiences with angels. And not just religious people, because 8 out of 10 Americans are not necessarily religious. So what exactly is this thing called angels? And how does Judaism look at it? Jews are not a magical religion. We don't believe in fairy tales, in fairies, and in all kinds of fantasies. Things are grounded and have a rational behind them. So to really appreciate what the meaning of angel is, we have to go back to the word malach. Malach. What does malach mean? So malach, the real meaning of malach, is a shliach, is a messenger. Is a messenger. And as we see in this verse, a messenger could either be a natural angel or it could be a messenger that you and I appoint. If you send someone with a message to achieve some mission, you send them somewhere to go achieve something, they are essentially your malach, your angel. So then what are we talking about when we say celestial angels? We say every day in the prayers that they're angels, and we say there are different names for them. We have the name Srafim, Efanim, V'chayes HaKodesh. 3 types of angels. Srafim are the angels that burn in fiery passion. Chayes HaKodesh means the angels that are alive, the holy forces of energy. And Efanim literally means wheels, because they spin. And you have, in many Jewish literature, you have reference to different types of angels who say praise to God, and they exist in the different spiritual realms. You have the story of the 3 angels that came to Abraham, dressed up. They looked like nomads, but they were actually 3 messengers, each one bringing a different a different mission, fulfilling a different mission, coming from heaven. You have the angels in last week's chapter when Jacob has the dream, and on the ladder there's angels going up and down. So you have the references again and again. There's actually two opinions when the angels were created, on day 2 or on day 4 of creation, or day 5 rather, day 2 or day 5. What is this thing called angels? So to really understand it, we have to get into a little more Kabbalistic and Hasidic terminology. And let's just use it in context of ourselves as an example. In the Kabbalistic structure of things, we come to try to understand that just like the human body is not just made up of organs and limbs, but the human body is made of, as we know, of cells and DNA and microscopic forces that are visible to the eye but now become very clear are the real underlying makeup of the human body. The same thing in the larger universe. Today we know that when you look at the world as you see it, that's a surface level, and beneath the surface everything's made up of elements. Periodic chemical table in chemistry. Elements in turn are made up of molecules. The most famous one, of course, water. Water is not just water. Water is H2O. 2 parts of hydrogen to 1 part of oxygen is the makeup and chemistry of water. But what's behind molecules? Today we know they're atomic atoms. And beneath the atoms, within the atoms lie subatomic particles. An atom is made of an electron, a neutron, a proton. Today we know there are also subatomic particles. How far down the rabbit hole we go, no one has a clue. But we definitely know that what we see is very surface. So that's an excellent analogy to something that the Kabbalists and the mystics always knew, that existence is not what you see is not what you get. There are underlying forces that shape and define everything that we see and experience. On the human level, for example, let's just use the mind as an example. You have the conscious mind, but then you have some call the unconscious, the subconscious. Kabbalah calls it supraconscious. Chachma is wisdom, and there's Chachma Stima, the hidden wisdom. So behind every object that we experience, there's behind the scenes, behind the curtain, something deeper going on. So to use a very simple example, when you see somebody, for example, shed a tear, tears come out of their eyes. So it's not that they first cry and then they feel sad. That's an indicator, a manifestation of an emotion called sadness, that for some reason, when it translates into the physical realm, creates tears in our tear ducts, and in turn we see a person weep, or if it's tears of joy. When you see someone smile and the face goes into a certain contortion that we all can recognize easily, even children, the youngest of age, recognize a smile. A smile is just an outer expression of an inner sentiment. So if you broaden that idea, all events in existence essentially have what we'll call a soul that's shaping the body that we see. So when it rains outside, you'll take an umbrella or a raincoat. A farmer will thank God because then the rain nourishes and nurtures the fields. A meteorologist will tell you that rain is a result of pressure systems and highs and lows and so on. And a Kabbalist or Chassid will tell you that rain perhaps is just like tears. Maybe it's the angels crying. It's the tears from a higher spiritual level that manifest in physical tears, just like by us. The feeling of sadness, in turn, is translated into physical tears. This is how the Kabbalah looks at the entire existence. That what you see on the surface is only the clock. But what makes a clock tick? What makes you tick? What makes me tick? What makes the world tick? These are forces that are beneath the surface. So physics and science will take you through, as I said, the elementary and the molecular and the cellular, all the way to the subatomic level. And the Kabbalists will take you a step beneath that, a step up within that, which is the spiritual. And that is ultimately the mysteries of existence, what shapes and defines our reality. So what is ultimately the difference between, not sounding morbid, between a live body and a dead body, a corpse? You see exactly the same body. the same organs, the eyes, the ears, and let's say for all practical purposes, there's no damage done. What's missing? There's something missing. You can call it electricity, you can call it energy, you can call it some force, we can call it a soul. What's missing is the inner dimension, the inner force that brings it all alive. So you can have the eyes can be physically intact, but the power of vision is not there because the soul is not there to manifest in a power of vision. Think of it like this. Everything in the world. You read a book, the letters and the words on the page are the body. The message and the ideas are the soul. You look at musical notes, on the outer level, you just see squiggles and the different shapes of notes. If you didn't know what it was, you'd think it's gibberish. Someone comes and suddenly plays an instrument and magic. Wow. Music. So everything has an outer and an inner. And the study of Kabbalah, as opposed to, let's say, the study of halacha, of Jewish law, and the Talmud and law deal with the mechanics, with how the machine operates. And the Kabbalah deals with the soul, what makes it tick, what's going on beneath the surface. So in that sense, when you think of it that way, so there's a whole, what we call a Seder Hishtalshus. Seder Hishtalshus means a cosmic order, a complicated map of what is the underlying topography of existence. So just like they're mapping the human genome, you can also map the spiritual genome because it's made of components. If any of you have seen my book on Counting the Omer, the spiritual guide to Counting the Omer, you'll see that the 7 weeks between Passover and Shavuos, which break into 49 days, 7 times 7, each reflect on a component of this map. Because we are a microcosm of existence and we too are made up of components. What are our components? Generally speaking, on the conscious level, 3 intellectual components and 7 emotional ones. The 3 intellectual is Chabad, Chachma, Bina, Das, and the 7 emotional is Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Chayid, Yisrael, Malchus. I know I said that quickly, but you can look it up on our site, you can look it up in the book and other places. These are 10 archetypes. You can't touch them, just like you can't touch your mind. You can touch your brain, you can't touch your mind. You can touch a heart, you can't touch emotions. But these ethereal forces are what make us who we are. And this is just the conscious level. Then there's the superconscious. And there's the superconscious. So in that context, the Kabbalah and Hasidic thought map out 4 general levels. You could say 4 dimensions of reality. Like I said, just like we spoke about the elementary elements, molecules, atoms, and subatomic particles, the same thing, you can say there are 4 levels of spiritual dimensions, which would lie beneath the surface of what we see with our naked eyes or what we experience with our sensory tools. And there are names for them. They're called Atzilus, Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya. These are 4 names. They're 4 Hebrew names. Basically, think of it, to give a simple example, Atzilus really means to impart, but it's considered the world of unity. Then Bria is creation, Yitzira is formation, and Asiya is a full-fledged, a full-dimensional body. So think of it this way. Everything in existence that we conceive of and we create requires 4 steps, whether it's a business plan, whether it's writing a book, whether it's writing a script for a film, whether it's building a building, architecture, or art, or music. Everything requires 4 steps. Step 1 is the vision. You have to have a vision of what you want to do. What do you foresee? What do you see? Whether it's an architect visioning a beautiful structure, whether it's a musician or a composer envisioning a beautiful piece of music, a sentiment they want to convey, an author wants to get a message across, or a business plan wants to get a business developed. So you begin with a vision, sometimes called a vision statement, a mission statement. That in turn has to translate into an outline. You need a skeleton, an outline. An outline lays out the basic headline, so to speak, of the structure that you want to create. An outline. The outline then is fleshed out. When you break it down into details, every component is fleshed out. And then comes the final 4th step, is the final product. So you have I'll do that once, but I can't keep repeating throughout because there are other people here. So No problem. Atzilus, Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya. Vision, outline, fleshing out, and the final product. So, by the way, all this is recorded and live broadcast, so in case you miss something, you can just go and check it out. So in that context, of course we say, Istakel Baraisa Bar Alma, God created the universe, just like we create a world through structure, God also used the same structure. And hence you have these four worlds, which are referred to in different verses. In the book of Isaiah, you say, which means, for my honor, I created, I shaped, and finalized a product. Every morning in the prayers, right after the Moda'ani, where we say, I thank you for returning my soul to me, we say, Neshama Nasatabi, the soul you've given me, Tahorihi, it's pure. That refers to Atzilus, the vision of the soul. Then you say, Ata Barasa, you've created it. That's the outline of the soul. And then Ata Yitzarta, you've shaped it. That's the fleshing out, the details. And Ata Nefachtabi, you've imbued it within me. You have instilled it within me. That's the full fleshed final product. And then V'ata Mesham B'kirbi, you protect it within me. So wherever you look around, and you'll see any type of project, and this can be anything, as I said, from a business plan to the greatest book, you need these four steps. And if there's something missing in these four steps, guaranteed the project will be compromised. If you're lacking vision, if you're lacking a good outline, if you're lacking the fleshing out, every piece needs to be put in place, and in that order. Very often you'll see a project begins with a vision, and then it gets hijacked. Someone comes and decides to change something, and suddenly you realize you've completely wandered away from the initial point of departure. So it's very critical to keep that vision driving the force of the forces that will go into shape. You can't have the bricklayers and the electricians and the plumbers to suddenly decide, you know what, we don't like the architectural plan, we want to change this, change that. Was it Mozart? He presented one of his great compositions to the Archduke of Austria. And the Archduke, who thought he was a connoisseur of music, so he said to Mozart, very beautiful music, but far too many notes. You understand, that's an expert. He said to him, too many notes. So Mozart purportedly responded, he said, yes, Your Majesty, but not one more than necessary. He says, many notes, yes, we also have 75 trillion cells in the body. It sounds like a lot, right? But, everything is necessary. Unless you understand the vision, you may not understand it, because you have to understand the bigger picture. So someone starts saying, even we have a story even with King David. King David, who praised God for all his creations, someone said to God that I understand the purpose of everything you've created except, he said two things, the spider, and I think the second thing was, I'm not positive, but the spider is a famous one. So he didn't understand what the role of a spider in existence in nature. Today, of course, we know that every creature, every fiber, every cell has a role to play. So the story goes in the book of Samuel, was it, or is it Melachim? That King David was being pursued by King Saul, and he was cornered. He had nowhere to go. The only thing he had ahead of him was a cave. So he ran to the cave in the hope that the soldiers won't go in there. So God made a miracle, and a spider came and weaved a quick cobweb over the mouth of the cave. So of course, when the soldiers went by and they saw a cobweb, they realized nobody had entered here, or else the cobweb wouldn't be there. And King David realized how a simple spider saved his life. That was God's response. Never question the role of every detail. So in the context of the vision and then the playing itself, there's these four dimensions. Now the real question, and what gets more fascinating, is what's going on in each of these dimensions. We barely know what's going on the surface level. Even the surface level of existence, we have very little knowledge, right? We know very little. But we know, for example, you look at the ocean. If we didn't have scuba diving and we didn't have cameras, you'd think there's a few fish in the sea. Here and there they jump out. You see a fin or two, and that's about it. Who would imagine that there's such a complex ecosystem working under the sea, which is even more complicated than on Earth? Confirming what it says in the Talmud thousands of years ago, Kol masha yesh biyabasha yesh biyam. Everything that exists on land exists in the sea. Which means, not the other way around, that everything that exists in the sea exists on land. That means the sea has more than what's on land. And we give names, like we have a sea elephant and a sea lion and a sea cucumber. Everything that exists on land, we find something that's a parallel in the sea. But the sea has far more species, to the point that scientists will tell you we have no idea how many. They're constantly finding new ones. You go to deeper, dark, lower places in the ocean that go completely beyond that man has never touched. You find new species in places that no one would ever expect there's life. In the darkest places under the sea where there's no light and there's no oxygen. But there's life, just like we find life in the desert. So when we look at this world, the small globe that we're on, forget about all the other dimensions. You look at the earth, covered 2/3 of the earth is covered in water. And what do we know about this ocean? We know more what's going on in the moon than we know about the sea that's just a few miles from us. Because it just teaches you what the Kabbalah is called Alma Diskasia, that the sea reflects on the hidden worlds. So just also a lesson of humility, as much as we've accomplished and as much as technology has advanced and our advancements in medicine and science and all areas of life, also to always remember that there's a lot more. As you climb the mountain and you see broader horizons, you realize how much more there is. This doesn't take away from what we've discovered, but it's important to remain humble in that sense. So what is going on in these hidden worlds, so to speak, that I just mentioned, these 4 worlds? Basically are parallel universes to what we experience here. So just like I said earlier, you see tears coming out of someone's eyes, they reflect on a sadness. Now, no one's ever figured out how does sadness become a tear. But it does. That's how it is. So it would be fascinating to understand how all human behavior, and you could say not just human behavior, but the world's behavior, is all really a reflection of those emotional attributes, or you could say divine forces beneath the surface. And that's what the study of Kabbalah really is about, is understanding what makes us tick. Because if you have an issue in your life, let's say you're anxious about something, or you're dealing with certain fears and insecurities, or in the area of relationships. So it's one thing is to take a Band-Aid and fix things on the surface level, which is a short-term dealing with a symptomatic medicine. It's quite another if you can go under the surface and rewire something, whether it's in the world of Atzilus and the vision, or in the world of Bria, or in the Tzira and Asiya, then you have a far more sustainable and long-term solution. So there's real implications in understanding these deeper dimensions. The more you understand what are the forces beneath the surface, the more you're able to access them and actually shift things in your life. If you don't travel there, the most you can do is a Band-Aid, is a short-term solution that's just usually not sustainable, and you're only dealing with it on the surface level. When you go into the forces that shape and define why are you this way, then you have the ability to actually change things on that core level, and in turn, the outer level, of course, will respond accordingly. So essentially, you could say, long before modern psychology, this was how mystics and the Kabbalists and scholars who were familiar with this school of wisdom, the study of the soul and its dynamics and its components, you could say, as I said, the DNA of the soul, that's how they looked at the universe. And that's why these were people called soul doctors. They were healers. Not through magic and hocus pocus, but simply because they had the insight of being able to look at symptoms and understand the root cause of these symptoms, as opposed to most of us who just look at symptoms and say, I have a headache, or I'm angry. That's a reaction. What's causing this reaction? What forces that make us tick? So essentially, if we could align our faculties, our intellectual faculties, our emotional faculties, as I said, our conscious faculties, align them with a vision of these faculties in the world of Atzilus, we'd have the perfect human being. As long as we don't, we have a distorted version of intelligence and of emotional makeup, which doesn't mean anything bad. It just means that there's work to be done. So it's like aligning and misaligning things. The more you're aligned to your own inner self, the outer self aligned to the inner self, the healthier you are as a human being. Simple as that. The less aligned, the less health there'll be. Psychological, emotional health. So a person who's really in touch means that their inner and outer are speaking to each other. They don't have a conflict, as many of us do. Many of us have, for example, certain feelings, but we can't express them because they won't be approved, or people we want to please, or we've been trained to become submissive and to be silenced. There's a perfect example of a dissonance between the inner and the outer. And this form of dissonance manifests in hundreds of ways in our lives. Inconsistencies between what we believe, what we feel, and what we do, our conscience versus our actions, And for all the different reasons, often associated ultimately with fear and insecurity, because we're afraid to be judged, we're afraid to be different, we're afraid to find our own voice. And many of us as children have been forced we've been shut up, we've been silenced. So we never allowed our voice to really develop. So what happens? You have an inner voice that's remained repressed, and you have an outer voice that's crying out, and from time to time you just get desperate because this dissonance is just too much for us. It takes on many, many shapes, but every type of psychological challenge is some form of dissonance, some form of inconsistency. And again, no different than let's go to the body. What is health at the end of the day? If you were to say it in one sentence or one word, health is a seamless flow between the energy of your soul and your body. If there's some obstacle, there's some impediment, there's some growth, God forbid, there's some blockage. For example, the bloodstream, the flow does not flow smoothly for whatever reason. There's an injury, then health is compromised. Health is essentially energy within containers flowing in a seamless way. If there's any dissonance, where the containers are not able to contain and monitor and regulate the flow, that is the definition of illness in its broad sense. Now, of course, illnesses take on different shapes and forms, but they all come down to some type of compromise of the container of our body, meaning the limbs and organs and so on, and the energy of our body, where they cannot flow smoothly. Look at a newborn child. A healthy newborn child is like a perfect specimen. There's no toxins yet. It has not developed bad habits, dietary ones or in other ways. So you see a perfect specimen. What do you see? Look how they breathe. A newborn child, a young child breathes, you see their chest heaving up and down. They're using 100% of their lungs. By the time someone's 5 years old, we're already not using a small percentage of our lungs. And as we get older, that's why if you take a deep breath, unless you're very well conditioned, you'll usually cough. Because we don't breathe all the way to the bottom of our lungs, because the bottom of our lungs are somewhat layered with toxins. The toxins of physical toxins and other toxins and so on. That's what dust does. That's what the pollen does. That's what an industrialized society does. Fresh air versus not fresh air. So our body begins to so-called wear down, and therefore the energy is compromised. Because think of it like a container. The container is punctured or corroded, it's not going to be able to hold in an intact fashion the energy, the liquid inside the container. The same is true in the body, and even more so in the soul. The soul also needs to have containers and the energy within the containers. For example, just to use an example, who hasn't had a situation when you were in school, where there's often in a class, you find a shy kid, and that's often is misunderstood as being and categorized as stupid, because the child doesn't speak, never responds. A few years pass and you realize this child is brilliant. For whatever reason, either they're shy or their personality or something happened, trauma, the child is very quiet. So there you have a perfect example. There's a lot of intelligence going on beneath the surface, but expression-wise, the child has not learned to express it, or doesn't have the strength to express it, or the courage to express it. How many strengths do we have within us right now that no one ever allowed you to really fully express, or actually stopped you from expressing? So we all suffer from some compromise between what the Kabbalists would call eris and kalim, energies and containers. Just take another example. Let's take writing as an example. As a writer, I can tell you this, okay? Well, good writing is a very delicate balance between not saying more than necessary and not saying less than necessary. Same thing with speaking. If you speak too much, you say too much, you go over it too long, you compromise the message. If you say too little, you compromise the message. So you have to find the exact balance of what words to use. And you'll see true wordsmiths and true craftsmen, both in speech and in writing, you'll see their writing is so seamless that when you read it, it's like a hand inside a glove. Whereas sometimes you'll see an idea, maybe a good idea, but it's erratically expressed. Erratic, E-R-R-A-T-I-C. So in other words, you'll often find people who say great ideas, but they don't know how to organize them. So they say B before A and C before D and D before C. The whole thing is a mess. So true communication is taking the energy of the ideas and dressing them up in the perfect balance of containers, words, to express the idea, the right metaphors, and so on. So everything in life is about balance. This is all a simple explanation of how the cosmic order works and how we grow in the process. So then when you have a standard of here's like a perfect way where Oyer and Keli, where energy and container work seamlessly with no dissonance, then you compare it and juxtapose it to where you are. You could say, okay, here's where I am, now here's how I get there. Like I get an x-ray of lungs. You see a doctor will show you the x-ray of the lungs on a what do they call it, on a screen, right? And they'll show you healthy lungs, and then they'll show you lungs that are not healthy. You'll see right away. By juxtaposing, you could see, here's a block, here's some impediment, God forbid, and so on. So we always need to have a backdrop of a healthy, perfect scenario, so then we can say, where do I stand, and compare it to that. Now you may wonder, what does all this have to do with angels? You'll see now how that has to do. So when you talk about each dimension, each of these dimensions, each of these worlds, without going into too elaborate detail, because some of this can become very complicated, and if you're not familiar with it, I don't want to overwhelm you with that, and something, we continue to grow and learn. But each of these worlds, so to speak, or each of these dimensions that I mentioned, the four, the vision, the structure, the outline, the flesh, the details, and the final product, each of them have so-called inhabitants, just like planets have those that live there, citizens. Each of these dimensions have inhabitants, not inhabitants in the physical sense. They have forces at work. And one of these forces is called malachim. What is a malach by definition? A shliach, a messenger. So for any level to transmit an energy to another level, you could speak about it not in personal terms, in archetypal terms, as a shliach, as a malach. So the word malach really, the Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the author of Tanya, founder of Chabad Hasidic thought, has in his Likutei Torah, he writes in Vayikra in the beginning, he says, every level is called a malach, is called a shliach, because it's carrying energy from one place to another. So really the definition of a malach is, the word angel is actually not a good word, because angel immediately conjures up definitions like fairies, elves, white-winged, whatever. What else do we have? Demons, good demons, bad demons. We have all this. We have all this in the literature of our comic book culture. You have all kinds of images of angels, and that's how we usually refer to them in a very juvenile nursery school. The angels. The angels, they're all over the place. An angel, at the end of the day, is a divine agent, an emissary that carries energy from one place to another place. That's what an angel means. Now you'll say, so what difference between an angel and a soul? The difference is a very key one, which I'll soon explain, but briefly, a soul has the ability to go into a completely different paradigm and transform it. Angels are not transformers. They are messengers. So, for example, if you have a palace of a king, so the ministers and the employees working in the palace, these are the angels. A soul is someone the king would send to a distant land to conquer a world, to achieve a major achievement. Angels are essentially confined to the dimension where they exist, and their role is to pass on and to serve as carriers of divine energy. That's what angels are. So when God wants to send an angel to bring a message to earth, God wants to send a message, let's say, to Abraham or to Jacob. We'll soon discuss this week's chapter. That's what's called malachim, angels. That's why Rashi writes in the beginning of this chapter that there are two interpretations, literal angels or messengers, because it's really the same thing. The question is whether they were messengers, human messengers, or they were divine messengers. That is the question. But essentially, they're all messengers. So once you demystify the word malach and turn it into a messenger, has a whole different meaning. Then, of course, anyone that has some type of sense of spirituality knows that we do get spiritual messages. So it could be when you're having an epiphany, maybe that's an angel speaking to you. Instead of thinking, however, in juvenile terms, you think of it in more spiritual terms. You see, we are not trained to think in sophisticated spiritual language. We are linear thinkers. It takes effort to think in abstract terms. So when we think of the word angel, we right away apply all our limited perspectives to an angel that it must be someone like me, that looks like me. Okay, not exactly like me, so he has a tail, and maybe he has wings, or she has wings, etc. But the real training that's necessary is to retrain the mind that there's a whole reality that is not linear. I mean, the best example I can give for it in science would be quantum mechanics. Where anyone familiar with quantum mechanics on the microscopic level knows that it's completely counterintuitive to the rules of macroscopic or Newtonian physics. Because it doesn't work that way. It's states of probability, it's what's called uncertainty principle. There are things that are not defined. We don't relate to that. By us, we like to understand things in defined terms. When you start reading about string theory, you start reading that there are things that are faster than the speed of light, and so on. These things usually confuse us because we're not accustomed to thinking in those type of language. We think in very linear terms. Here's a chair, here's a table. You get a little more intelligent, you realize there's something deeper in there. Any of you have seen, for example, what's her name? I always forget her name. She did that TED Talk and then wrote a book, The Stroke of Genius. She was a neuroscientist who went into neuroscience because, why don't you look it up, tell me. In neuroscience, because her brother had schizophrenia. Her name is, three names. Who's looking it up, we'll find out. Anyway, she went into this. And then, of all things, to her luck, her luck, she gets a stroke. She suffers a stroke. A stroke, and that affected the left side of her brain. Okay. And she speaks a fascinating talk. You found it? Stroke of genius, right? So look for stroke of genius. No, you can't find it? Okay. Yeah. So she gives this talk. I just want to briefly share with you what she says. And it's by no means a religious talk, but if you listen to it, it's completely mystical. She says that being a neuroscientist, she understood immediately what's happening to her in the stroke. Now, what's the difference between the left brain and the right brain? The left brain is detail-oriented. The right brain is field of energy-oriented. The right brain connects things, and the left brain separates things. So she says, for example, she woke up in the morning, and she wanted to brush her teeth. And she knew that she has to brush her teeth, but because the left brain was compromised, she couldn't put her hands on the toothbrush and touch it. So in her mind, she was envisioning it, because the right brain just envisions an entire picture of brushing your teeth, a vision, so to speak, like Atzilus, as I mentioned. But the left brain is necessary to be able to distinguish and put your fingers on something. That's where you'll find a lot of stroke victims. The paralysis, what is really paralyzed, is the messages from the brain going to that particular part of the body that are not being transmitted. So in a sense, if you think of it that way, so these transmissions are necessary. These are called angels. This is what angels are, that make sure the transmission. And she speaks about how when you see things from the right brain, you see everything in one big field of energy. Everything is connected. Now, when we look with our eyes right now in this room, you don't see everything connected. There are bookshelves, there are books, there are chairs, there are people, there are technologies, there's all kinds of things. But on the other hand, let me ask you a question. If someone says to you, give me the picture of the entire room, you can do that as well. So you can break it into detail, but you can look at it as one big picture. Just like we look at a piece of art. We take in the whole art, and then you could say and break it down into detail. There was a famous book, a bestseller called Drawing the Right Side of Your Brain. It was a very well done, a book that was very well received, training people how to draw. You know, it's very difficult to draw. And it was about using the right side of the brain, because the key to drawing, to visualize something and then commit it to paper. But going back to our theme here, so we have a universe that is, to us, appears as fragmented and separate. But today, modern science has taught us that it's all connected. And it's really all part of one quilt. Think of it that way. One invisible quilt that connects everything. Now, with modern technology, we're beginning to relate to it a lot more and more, because we could sit right here. In your hand, you could have all the information of the world, immediately, in this moment, in this space, everything. You know, which is, if you think about it, quite miraculous. There was once a thing called space and time. For you to be able to see what's happening in Australia would take a number of hours for you to get there. Today you could have a TV camera beaming photos that instantaneously are seen thousands of miles away. Does anybody understand how that works? how that's possible. So scientists will tell you that they may not understand the whole dynamics, but they know because it's tapping into energy forces that transcend time and space. Exactly right. And when you transcend time and space, you can create technologies like the telephone and like television and radio, and today we call it internet or mobile and so on. Now most of us don't even pay attention. We could all be sitting on our mobile phones right here, thousands of people, and the airwaves don't confuse, don't cross. I mean, sometimes there is turbulence and sometimes that exists, but it's a tremendous power that we are not visible to our eyes that we're tapping into, that connects something in the universe in ways that could never have been imagined. So in essence, there is an underlying so-called unifying force that connects everything, but our visual, or you could say our sensory tools, only experience the details and the specifics. So therefore, in that context, if you think of it that way, then the purpose of going back to the angel idea, angels, we cannot apply linear thinking to an angel. You have to think of an angel as a force of energy. It's an energy force. And there are different names. There's the angel Michael. That's the energy force connected to kindness. There's the Malach Gabriel sometimes called, Gevura, associated with the energy of discipline. You have the angel Nuriel, and you have the angel Uriel, and you have all kinds of angels' main names. There's an entire book written by a scholar, Reuven Margolis. She collects all the names of angels, positive, negative angels, as well as male and female angels, wherever they are in the Torah. Each of them is like a connection between two dimensions, an energy that connects two dimensions. That's what the whole world of angels is about. So now when Jacob wanted to send and wanted to find out what is the status with his brother, so he sent messengers. He called them Malachim. Now what are the two opinions? The two opinions are they actually divine or they're not? That depends on what Jacob's attention was. Jacob, of course, knew that Esau was his twin, but also his archenemy. He understood also that these were like two spiritual entities, Jacob and Esau, as we learned two chapters back, that they were struggling in their mother's womb. So he knew there's a serious struggle. So if he was looking to disconnect or discover Esau on the spiritual level, you can say he sent spiritual angels. If not, you can say he sent actual physical people to encounter and see whether we'll need to go to battle with Esau. But regardless, however you determine it, it's called a messenger. And we all have the ability to send messengers. Whenever we convey a message or we communicate with someone in a way, we're sending an angel to them. Then there's the other angel, the angel that wrestles with Jacob, which gets us into the topic of good and bad angels. But before I go there, let me share a story, and then we'll continue on that topic. The Baal Shem Tov, the great Hasidic master, the founder of Hasidic movement, was once approached by one of his students who said, I would like to see Gili Eliyahu. Gili Eliyahu is another angel, the prophet Eliyahu, who we say appears at every circumcision. He appears Seder night, right? You make a cup of Eliyahu. He's an angel. He was once a human being. He was once a prophet on earth, but then he turned into an angel. From the rare humans that turn into angels. So someone wanted to have a revelation of the Eliyahu. It's considered a deep spiritual revelation. So the Baal Shem Tov sent him for Rosh Hashanah to go to a certain city and says, you stay there, you'll have the revelation of Eliyahu in your life. He goes there, he finds the address, he asks around, people think he's mistaken because this is a home of people who are poor and don't know money. He's about to knock on the door and he hears children crying. The mother is a nervous wreck. The father is a mess. And they say, Yom Tov is coming, the holiday is coming, Rosh Hashanah, we have no money, we have no food, we have nothing. Then he knocks on the door, they come in and he says, do you have perhaps an extra room? I'm ready to pay to stay here. They say, yeah, you could stay here, but we have no money, we can't offer you any food or anything like that. He said, no problem. And he goes out shopping, buys food for the whole family, and they had, like a miracle. Rosh Hashanah came, they were able to celebrate relatively properly. Fine. They thank him, the holiday ends. Nothing eventful happens except the regular holiday. He comes back to the Baal Shem Tov after Rosh Hashanah. And the Baal Shem Tov, he tells the Baal Shem Tov, it was very, it was a nice family. They need a lot of help and blessings. But Eliyahu I did not see, the angel. Baal Shem Tov says, go back for Yom Kippur. Okay. So he goes. And same story. He comes to the door, he hears everybody crying and all that stuff. Now Yom Kippur is coming. And the children are saying, what are we going to eat? What are we going to dress up? Holiday. Some type of holiday spirit, holiday clothing. So the mother says, maybe just as God sent us Eliyahu, the prophet, for Rosh Hashanah, maybe He'll also send him again for Yom Kippur. And then suddenly he realized the Baal Shem Tov's meaning. Eliyahu, he himself was the prophet. He himself was the angel. Sometimes we look for salvation elsewhere, and it could be that we are the one that's meant to rise to the occasion. So if you think of it that way, it means that we have the power sometimes, more than we may ever imagine, to be able to actually achieve great things. Because we too have angelic power of God, in addition to our power as souls, to achieve things. The problem is we don't have that confidence. We don't feel we are capable to rising to the occasion. So this story indicates that angels are far deeper and more complicated than just some type of as I said, childlike or nursery school forces. These are forces that we generate. And that's why you find very often in Jewish literature, you'll find the idea that when you pray properly, you create an angel. When you do a good deed, you create a praklit, you create an angel. An angel that protects you, that will defend you. And it says when you do something inappropriate, or you pray inappropriately, or you do something not complete, you create a maimed angel. And to the point, if you do something negative, you actually create negative angels. What does all this mean? These are energies that we create. It's called vibes sometimes. Vibes. A person that has a healthy attitude, I'm sure you've met people that as soon as you see them, as soon as you're in their presence, you feel comfortable. You go to a party, you just feel comfortable. Then there are times you go to a place and you just feel uncomfortable. You can't even put your finger on it. Very often by a party or an event, if the hosts are miserable, everybody usually feels miserable. Not because they say anything. They just create a miserable energy. And it spills over to the waiters, to the guests, and so on and so forth. Some of us are more sensitive to this than others. On the other hand, when you have hosts, people who are very comfortable in their own skin, and they're getting along and so on, that spills over and it's a vibe. It's a good vibe. What does a good vibe mean? Well, in this context, good vibe is a good energy. Where's energy generated from? It's generated from our behavior, from our attitudes. So in a sense, when we do a good deed, we generate a good angel. Again, take away angel from the imagery of an elf or something with wings, and think of it just in terms of a force that we generate. And we all have, as we come home, for example, Shabbos from prayers, what's the first thing we do? We sing Shalom Aleichem, Malachi Asharis, Malachi Elyon. We say, welcome the angels that have escorted us. The angels that have escorted us through the week into Shabbos, and the new Shabbos angels that escort us into the Shabbos energy. And then we say goodbye to them before the meal begins. Why? Because they played their role. So we have these ideas that we say every time, and we just don't even think about it. What it's talking about is, if you said Shalom Aleichem, most people say it by rote, they sing it, it's mechanical. But let's just take it beyond the mechanical. It's meant to be that as you go to a Shabbos table, you're putting aside all the grime and the toxins and the pollution of a weekday of work, of a week work, the work week, and you're entering a pure place. Very many people bring their anger, their bitterness, their weariness into Shabbos. The whole point of Shalom Aleichem is to say, leave that by the door and bring in new angels. Bring in new energy, and that the table would be blessed with a harmony. It's called Shalom Bayis. One of the reasons we light candles for that same purpose. So when you think of it that way, all our good deeds, all our actions, our attitudes are creating either good energy or bad energy. Now, as I said, Jacob sent those messengers, those angels, for good purpose. He wanted to know what the story with Esav is. But then you have the second part of the chapter, where the wrestling angel that wrestles with him on behalf of Esav, that was a negative angel. It was negative for Jacob, it was good for Esav, because he was representing Esav and Esav's power. But there's a confrontation. There's a confrontation. So negative energy creates negative angels. And negative angels, of course, create more negative energy that becomes more toxic, that has that type of impact on our lives. So when you think of it this way, then every act you do, every action has a reaction. Every behavior has consequences. There's no such thing as you did something and nothing happens. The fact that we like to go into denial or feel like, who cares what I did, it's not true. Even if you don't think you hurt somebody, because it's not affecting any other person, you've released an energy. It's either going to be a positive energy or a negative energy. Now, when I once told this to somebody, and he said to me, okay, is it possible to create a neutral energy? That's like the guy who said, I used to think I'm indecisive, and now I'm not so sure. So, in this context, neutral, it's like if you think of it this way, that you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. Neutral is part of the problem, because it means you're not generating. You're not proactively generating something positive. You're standing on the sidelines. In the world in which we live, you're either influencing or you're going to be influenced. You're either generating and sending good angels out there, or you're going to absorb negative energy of others. Now, what's interesting is what happens when there's a confrontation. What happens if you're giving off good energy and someone else is giving off bad energy? What happens when they meet? So you have this week's chapter. That's exactly what happened that night. Jacob, who was a refined, holy man, goes back to get a few remaining jars, which is indicated in Kabbalistic thought as collecting the last sparks, pachim ketanim. Pach means jars, but it also can mean the pach, like from the word pach hashemen, the jars of oil, which refers to the divine sparks that remained over. He's confronted by this stranger, and the stranger is the negative energy of Esav, who wants to prevail over him. And they battle, and Jacob prevails over him, but not without consequences. He incurs a wound because the angel of Esav, before he left, misplaced his the hip bone, the gid hanosha, or the sciatic nerve. However, the sciatic nerve, different ways it's explained. And the Ramban says something very powerful, that displacement by Esav was Edom, which would later become Rome, the Christian world. That displacement is all the times that righteous people suffered the hands of Esav's descendants, was all captured in that moment when the Esav's angel displaced Jacob's hip. Which is why we bring a gid hanosha. That's why that part of the body we do not consume when you slaughter an animal and you could eat its meat. Is that part is never touched, as to remember that moment. And in the Zohar it says the night that they had this battle was when Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av. It was Tisha B'Av night, which makes sense because Tisha B'Av is Zekam v'Zenofel. Esav and Jacob, as you said, they're two archetypes. They're two nations. The nation of the Western world and the Jewish world, and both cannot coexist. And what was the destruction of the temple? Destruction of the temple on Tisha B'Av was either the Babylonians or the Romans. One way or the other, the Romans especially associate with Magdiel Zur Remi, like the last Rashi in this week's chapter talks. Rome is a grandson of Esav, so the Roman conquest of the Jerusalem is essentially a replay of the angel of Esav in some way touching and displacing the hip of Jacob. But like I said before, every displacement is a form of dissonance. But Jacob still prevailed. He came out wounded and limping, but he won the battle, and he actually got the enemy to give him the name Israel. So this name, every time you hear the word Israel, the children of Israel, the land of Israel, it's actually a name given by a negative energy to a positive energy. So when we have these confrontations, many people ask the question, what do I do when I have no choice, but I have a coworker who just gives off bad energy, or a brother or sister or a family member that I just don't like to be around? But so if it's a situation where you can avoid being around, that's always the best solution. However, there are situations where you can't sometimes, especially if it's a family member or it's a colleague or a worker, a co-worker, because you're in the same proximity. The answer is straightforward, as it says, positive energy is always more powerful than negative energy. When you're in that situation, it behooves you to exude even more positive energy than usual, to both buffer and immunize you from the other person's stuff. Because as long as you feel a victim, you feel victimized, and you feel contaminated by another person, that means that you're not strong enough. So Jewish approach to this is wrestle. Wrestle doesn't mean you have to go fight with that person. You could avoid them as much as possible, but exude positive energy, and the one who gives off more energy is the one that's going to win. But it's not that easy, because the fact is, and I don't have any estimate for this, but I've been thinking about it a lot lately because I deal with all kinds of situations. You think how much energy is invested by people in fighting demons and bad angels in their minds and their hearts. If you take a day, during a regular day, how much time you think are you fighting negative stuff, and how much time are you dedicating to positive? Unfortunately, the latter, the negative, fighting the negative, is far more dominant, and it's would be quite demoralizing to figure out how much time we actually spend on it. Because it's hard to take statistics, but how often are you in the middle of doing something, even a positive thing, and then something distracts you, brings you back to what this person did to you, this grievance, this anger, this unfairness, and so on. And then you see somebody else who you feel is succeeding. Why are they succeeding? Why am I not? Etc., etc. Very easy to fall into the trap of being trapped by your own negative energies. So then you become a victim of those demons. They are dominating your life. They dominate your life. Now, you can go and try to fight demons by shooting them or in some way strangling them, but the fact is, can you strangle darkness? The only way to eliminate darkness is through light. There's no weapon in the world devised yet, not a chemical weapon, not a nuclear weapon, not a pistol, not a tank, that can fight darkness. It's one simple thing. A little light dispels a lot of darkness. The lesson of Hanukkah at the end of this month. So what is light in this context? Positive energy. But the problem is we're sometimes so overwhelmed and overcome by our negative energy, we don't have the strength to generate positive energy. Well, that's the challenge. You better find that strength, because it's your only salvation. Because just to try to eliminate the negative is almost impossible. And even if you eliminate one thing, there's always another thought. Remember, a person who's driven by fear and insecurity and negative thoughts has no problem finding new negative thoughts. You get rid of one, there's always another one to replace it, as we know. Because it's not about one thought, it's an attitude. It's like looking at everything, and everything becomes so-called your enemy. That's why you'll find in the famous story, I always repeat it, from the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yitzchak Schneerson, when he was arrested by the communist Soviets, especially the Jewish Yevseksy, the Jewish communists who were the worst of them all, and they pointed a gun to his head. He was not cooperating, and said, Rebbe, this gun has changed many people's minds, has made many people cooperate. And he unflinchingly said to them, this toy, this tzatzke, can frighten someone that has one world and many gods, but not someone that has one God and many worlds, or two worlds. What does that mean? Like in investments, you diversify. If you put all your eggs in one basket, the basket is gone, it's over with. But the person who has the breadth and the scope of many horizons in their lives, including spiritual ones, knows you can't frighten them to take something away. You're going to take away, I have other worlds to benefit from. This is a person who's not just grounded, but a person who has the spiritual fortitude that cannot be afraid of anything. Now, most of us we cannot expect from most of us to have that type of fearlessness. The Baal Shem Tov, on his father's deathbed, when he was a young child, one of the things his father told him, don't be afraid of anything but God. I have an uncle who was unfortunately killed in a car accident, my mother's brother. And when he was a child, my grandmother once told me this story. So that there were thunderstorms at night. So children get scared. Came running to his mother's bed, my grandmother that is, my uncle's mother. And she said, what's the matter? His name was Yosef Fitzchak. So he said, I'm afraid. There's the thunder. So his mother said, go back to bed. Don't be afraid about anything but God. It's the only thing you have to be afraid of. The thunder can't hurt you. Goes back to bed. Okay, goes to sleep. Of course, the thunderstorm isn't over. Half hour later, thunder again. He comes running back to his mother's bed. Now what? He says, I'm afraid of God. You know? That's what he said. The thunder became... okay, so the point of the matter is, fear is a big force in our lives. However, you don't counter it by suddenly saying, you know what, okay, I'm going to shoot the fear in the head, or I'm going to defang it or eliminate it. Impossible to do it. Fear is an invisible enemy. You can't fight an invisible force. There's only one way to do it, exactly like darkness. The absence of light, the way to fight absence of light is light. The way to force the absence of courage is with courage. That's what it comes down to. To find areas in your life that you could hold on to, those positive angels, the positive energy, and do something good. Every person on this earth can do something good any given moment. You may not be in the mood, you may be lazy, you may be overwhelmed by your negative stuff, but it doesn't mean you can't do it. It's just that you're succumbing and surrendering. So of course, if you surrender, what do surrenderers do? They end up losing. So the approach is that you have to find a positive thing. That's why you'll find the Jewish approach to tragedy was always with positive energy. They always built something. Someone tragically was killed. Someone tragically died prematurely. As sad as and terrible that is, it was always translated into some positive act. Because the end of the day is grief, and every negative energy is, at the end of the day, energy. It's still energy. It's just negative energy. It's imploding energy instead of growthful energy. So when you take energy and you harness it and you channel into taking that anger that comes with grief and channeling into something positive, that's how you take a negative angel and turn it into a positive one. And that's the story. Jacob wasn't just happy that he won the battle with the angel and now he's ready to let him go. No, you battled with me. Now bless me. And he asks him, what's your name? He says, my name is Jacob. He says, from now on I'll be Yisrael. Why? Yisrael means because you've battled with people and with angels, with God, and you have prevailed, which is an unbelievable blessing. It means is the power to prevail over all forms of adversarial forces. So there you have a take on angels that is completely different than what most of us would think of. It's not about elves. It's not about little munchkins or whatever other names you can find. Angels are essentially divine forces. And they can take on a positive shape and they can take on a negative shape. And it's in our control. We ourselves can become the angel, as I mentioned in the Baal Shem Tov story. We can become positive agents or become negative agents. And then we can turn others into agents as well. Because like a flame, when you share and you inspire somebody, a flame that lights another flame doesn't get diminished, it only gets stronger. So we have the ability to continue perpetually affect others, which is essentially when you exude positive energy, that positive energy is like an angel that's being sent by you, and that angel in turn creates more positive energy. That's how it works. So it comes down to the end of the day, which is a difficult question to ask your friends because most of them probably won't answer, is to ask the question like this, when I hang around with you, do you feel drained by me or you feel empowered by me? It's hard for me to imagine someone's going to tell you, by the way, since you're asking, I should let you know I feel pretty drained by you. If a person says that, maybe that's a good, honest response. But it's interesting. Do you ever think about it? We'd love to think that any person we meet loves to see us and can't wait, and they feel after they finish the conversation empowered. But let's be honest, we know that not everybody. We know many people that don't do that for us. So are we doing it for others? It's an interesting question. Are you giving off positive angels or your negative ones? So how do you get an answer to this? You probably have to sit down with someone you trust and review your life, and they'll and say, and have them answer the question maybe in a diplomatic or sensitive way. But it's a good thing to know. One of the easiest ways to know is how many people gravitate toward you. If you see people avoiding you, there may be a reason. You're giving off an energy, a negative energy, and people don't like to be around negative energy. I'm not saying this in a critical or judgmental way, it's just a reality that many of us just become victims of our own selves, our own worst enemy, where our bitterness or our anger, we meet people like this. I mean, I've been trained, I always like to think of seeing positive, but to be honest, you meet people sometimes like that, and you just see it. You could see it in the wrinkles in their face, or the way they dismiss things, the way they criticize others. People just have extremely negative energy, And this doesn't mean they have to. It just means that's what's happened. Often it comes from childhood. It comes from things we pick up from our parents. If our parents were angry, very often that passes on. But we are not victims of anyone. We can change anything at every given moment. That's the key thing, because, to go back to the beginning of the discussion here, Neshama shenasata bi taharahi. The soul that you gave me, we say to God, is pure. You have within you all the purity, all the positivity, all the progressive and good angel energy to be able to achieve anything you wish if you set your mind to it. What may have happened is that something got lost in translation, so to speak, and the channels, as it came into Bria, Yetzirah, Asiyah that I was talking about before, as it manifests in our daily lives, may be blocked, may be in some way impeding, an impediment, which doesn't allow the healthy energy of our souls to express itself. Similar to having a healthy heart, but the arteries are blocked, or the arteries are thickened, and so on. So Michelangelo, there you go, Angel Michelangelo. Many people have always thought he was Jewish. They have no proof that he's Jewish, but he definitely was exposed to a lot of Jewish thinkers, including Kabbalists, because where he studied in Florence was a very strong Jewish community there, and we know which families he lived among and studied with. There's a lot of interesting books on the topic. How he got his name Michelangelo is interesting. I'm not sure. I have to check that out. But Michelangelo, of course, Angel Michal is considered the guardian angel of the Jewish people. So Michelangelo was once asked, how do you sculpt those beautiful angels in the marble? And his response was, I see the angels trapped in the marble, and I carved and set them free. Okay, think about that. That means that each of us has within us beautiful angels, a beautiful flower, beautiful music. But sometimes it gets trapped in marble, or concrete, or other substances. You can fill in the blanks, what kind of substances. So what happens suddenly is the beauty that you are when you were born, has now become encrusted and entangled in a mess. This doesn't take away from your beauty. It doesn't take away from the angel. It means it's trapped. We have to carve. And we have to allow it to express. And when you do express it, it's not something coming from outside. It's you. The real you finally rising to the occasion and presenting itself, showing up, so to speak. So it's a very, you could say, visual way, a poetic way of looking at your life. You look in the mirror, and who do you see? You see the outer you, the you as you are today, but is it really the you that you're capable of, the you your possibilities, your potential? They say, Kissinger writes, I think in his memoirs, Henry Kissinger, who's Secretary of State of President Nixon, that when Nixon resigned due to Watergate, so that night, that fateful night, Nixon asked them to pray with him. They got on their knees. The Jew Kissinger got on his knees with Nixon. And then when Nixon was going to go sign the resignation papers, so he writes, or he tells, that Nixon walked through the hall in the White House, and he came to that famous painting of JFK. It's like that pensive pose where he sits on a chair with his head down, and on a very meditative pose. And he muttered the following. He said, they love you because you remind them of who they want to be. And they hate me because I remind them of who they are. That's what Nixon said. Okay. Whether he said it or not, that's what they give. It doesn't matter. It's a good line. Because that's correct. Who knows JFK? We didn't even know him. He was assassinated, so he became deified, idolized, Camelot. I'm not taking away. Maybe he was a great guy. Maybe, who knows? There's all kinds of back and forth. But bottom line is, so fine, we idolized, we created the fantasy of something, who we want to be, the youth, energy, vibrancy, change, everything that JFK represents for so many people. Glamorous. And Nixon, of course, whether Watergate was the worst sin happened in the United States is another question. It's not a discussion for now. But he got caught. As they say, the 11th commandment, don't get caught. The other presidents didn't get caught doing similar things or worse. But it's not a justification, whatever it was. But Nixon became this symbol of anger, of embattlement, of paranoia, and so on. So there's who we want to be, and there's what we are. The Alter Rebbe puts it this way, that a person has to always know how small they are and how great they can become. Both. Humility dictates you need to know where you are. Because to start having illusions of grandeur that you're not there yet is not going to be productive. On the other hand, just to know how small you are and not to know how great you can become is also very demoralizing. We have two steps. Any greatness will be achieved, any excellence will be achieved by, as I said earlier, the juxtaposition of who you are right now and what you can become. So when we read about these angels, divine angels, we're reading about models, role models of different forces that we can become. And it's within our power and our capacity, but we have to carve. And as I said before, we have to exude, we have to generate positive energy. That's something everybody can do. Which means, even if you're not in the mood, even you're at the darkest moment, you know what? Say to yourself, since when does your mood define existence? Maybe there are people that need you. Go out there and help somebody, volunteer. You say, well, you're not in the mood. That's precisely maybe when you need to do it most. Because why are you allowing yourself to become your moods to define? You're here to serve, so serve. If you really felt you were on a mission, you think there's time right now whether you're in a good mood or a bad mood? Now obviously we all have times where we need respite, we need to reflect, we need to gather our strength. But not when you're the darkest moments, that's the time when you need most light. So to say then and say, you know what, now I won't do it, I'll wait till I feel better. It's exactly the opposite approach. That's when you need the light, when you're not in the mood. And that's how we confront our angels, the positive ones and the negative ones. And the interesting thing, as I said in the story, you ultimately can actually transform negative energy into positive energy. It's not just one way. It's just not the positive. You actually can transform darkness into light using a Hasidic expression. So, to really appreciate the concept, you have to sometimes close your eyes and realize that, as I said before, an angel is not the way we usually visualize it in kindergarten. An angel is an energy. Think of it like the energy of music. Each angel has its particular songs, and they are part of our reality. They're part of helping us connect to something greater than ourselves. When we read about the angels singing songs of praise, as we say every day in the prayers, we're actually giving ourselves, we're defining role models that we can access. So there you have the angel stories, at least some part of it. I hope I did some justice to it. I'll probably develop this further. I don't think I've ever talked on this topic, but it just struck me because of this week's chapter. Angels, angels, angels. Maybe it's time to discuss a little. Shluchim, messengers, ambassadors. So may God bless us all to be walking ambassadors. Using the metaphor from Hanukkah, we should be walking menorahs. Wherever you go, you bring light. Years ago, I don't know, I was a young kid, and someone told me, I was talking to someone, they said they have to go to a meeting. That was the first time I ever heard the word meeting. There's always a first. You're not born knowing what a meeting is. Meeting is one of these man-made institutions. You meet, there's meetings, right? Office meetings, this meeting, that meeting. So I asked the guy, what's a meeting? I remember till this day. And he said to me, a meeting, remember always, meetings either drain you or they empower you. So after that, until this day, every time we have a meeting, I finish the meeting, I say, so what was this meeting? Did it drain us or did it empower us? It's always pretty obvious usually. Some meetings are just like exasperating and can just drive you crazy, whether because people don't agree or they just go in circles and talk and everyone wants to talk and talk and talk and talk. And then there are meetings, efficient meetings. you get something done. A guy was telling me he was on the board of a synagogue, and they invited him on the board, and he said it became ridiculous. Every time they sat, what was their discussion? Should we change the doorknobs in the shul? So why shouldn't we? It's expensive. We're talking about expensive. He's sitting with a board of people who can afford changing doorknobs. So he decided, he's going to try something. So he said, you know what? I'll pay for changing the doorknobs. What else is on the agenda for this meeting? And they literally told him there was nothing else. They didn't think they'd have time to cover anything else. Can you imagine? So the doorknobs, he says, from meeting after meeting, he just eliminated that. So then the next meeting, okay, what else is wrong? And finally, he said they changed the meetings to figure out what can we do to build this place instead of just talk about changing doorknobs. Now, this is not exaggeration. As you all probably been to meetings, some meetings have this purpose. Then you have bosses or whatever, heads of departments that need to meet for their own egos, so as to demonstrate that they're in power or whatever it is. Okay, I don't know if that's the category empowering. It's not. It's probably more draining. Someone else's exercise in arrogance or whatever it may be. But that's the price you pay, I guess, when someone pays your salary. You have to at times tolerate these what shall we say, these injustices, these violations. But the good news is that a lot of our lives is in our own control. And that's what we have to focus on. When it's in your control, what kind of energy you're giving off. And the greatest blessing when someone can tell you, just by looking at you, just by being around you, I feel uplifted. Not even by what you say. The energy you give off, the positive energy. And that's something we should work towards. And of course, you may think you're there already, but you may be rudely awakened if you find out otherwise. So this is a goal. This is a goal. This is how we surround ourselves with angels. Shalom aleichem malachi asharis. Surround ourselves with the proper angels. Just like Jacob, last week's chapter, he left Haran, and there were angels that escorted him from there, like the weekday. And there's the Malachi Eretz Yisrael, the angels that enter Eretz Yisrael. So you have all forms everywhere you go. You can create these type of energies. So God bless us all of you, all of us, everybody, with being forces of agents of change in this world. Positive change, illuminating. Look, we live in a world today that's becoming increasingly crazier and crazier. Madness, literally, in Israel, in Europe, things that people completely don't even know where to begin. Our leaders are clueless, if that's to put it mildly. They're talking about, it's so embarrassing, actually. So it can become very frightening that, who's minding the store here, that's when I believe that as Jews especially, who've seen the abyss many times, unfortunately, we've been through it all. We have a particular role to play now, to be agents of light, to bring good energy into this world. That doesn't mean automatic. Obviously, we need the military and police and do whatever it takes to eliminate people just killing randomly innocent people. And now it's no longer just occupiers of occupied territory in Israel or Jews. It's just anybody. Anybody is like a target practice in Europe and so on. Maybe that's God's way of showing, just like it was with the Nazis. They don't just attack Jews. Because the fact of the matter is, anyone that attacks an innocent person will ultimately attack other innocent people. Don't ever think it's going to be only to one group. Because once you've violated that rule, which is not to touch someone that's a man, woman, and child that is not in mortal combat, mortal in any way your threat, means you've crossed a line which there's no end to it. So we have a role to play, besides obviously, as I said, standing strong, but also bringing very passionate, powerful energy into the world. And I'm not saying this in a naive way of saying that's enough, obviously, but don't underestimate that power. That's what Jews did. That's why this world has changed, because we did not fight darkness with darkness, and we didn't fight evil with evil. After World War II, the Jews had all the right to exercise vengeance on Germany and Europe. And instead, what did? We built our lives. We built our schools. We built our families. Every Holocaust survivor will tell you, my vengeance. They'll open up a photo album of pictures of their children and grandchildren. That's how we do things. And don't think that's turning the other cheek. It means we may suffer, but we're not sufferers. We will not be defined by what other people did to us. It's a tremendous lesson in psychology, both individually and collectively, how healthy people think. You'll never be defined by your enemy. Your enemy will not have the power to shape how you think. Which means, as much as they may have demoralized and dehumanized and killed and annihilated, we do not be shaped by that type of attitude. Like the famous, the classic story where a Nazi was about to shoot a Jew in one of the concentration camps, and the Jew asked the Nazi if he can say a few words of prayer before he dies. And the Nazi said yes. He gave him permission, and the Jew began to whisper. And the Nazi got angry and said, "What are you whispering there?" He says, "I'm thanking God." He said, "What are you thanking God for? Where's your God, you dirty, miserable Jew? I'm about to kill you. Where's your God?" He says, "I'm thanking God for creating me not like you." That's what he responded. See, now this is not just taking the high road. It means that we have a higher purpose and a higher way of looking at things. And at times like this, it's critical to be able to have that type of positive thinking. At the same time, to be very realistic on the ground and do what has to be done. You know, in the beginning, I thought for me it was almost like a joke, but I think I'm getting more serious about my opinion. I don't know. I think we can't elect President Putin as the next president of the United States, but maybe Israel should try to hire him for a year, and I think he'll solve a lot of the problems. So as I said initially, when I thought about it, I thought it was a joke, but I think he's the only guy, whether you like him or not, he's the only guy that can stand up to these, to this. You get the idea, huh? Putin. Okay. If you want to take that as a joke, take it as a joke. If you think it's serious, take it seriously. I don't want to offend anybody, but I'm thinking more and more about it. But that's another part of the discussion. Just wanted to make a few words, and God should, of course, be together and protect all innocent people on this earth, especially in Israel, in France, and anywhere, against any enemy, and to foil any plot and conspiracy. Unfortunately, this has become almost a regular daily thing in Eretz Yisrael, and we have to remember that not only our hearts and minds and prayers, but also our beings, because if we were there, we'd be just the same target as they are. And remember, the enemy is not just the enemy against one person, it's the enemy against many. And I'm not going to go here now and trying to justify or trying to understand the enemy's mind and all their grievances and anger. You know, crazy acts like flying planes into the World Trade Center, or just going into cafes randomly and stadiums, just killing people, is just simply not acceptable. That's that. So I hope we'll have leaders that will understand that and do what has to be done. Yes, much more to say about this. We'll keep now some things between the lines. And going back to our theme here, what we can do is be, as I said, agents, ambassadors, angels of change, good angels that exude good energy. So everyone should have a very blessed and angelic week. And then until next Wednesday, we continue this Wednesday night journey. As I mentioned at the outset of this class, we have, as you may have seen, a completely new overhauled website with many more offerings. I would welcome your comments, your thoughts, and of course leave me your email address so we can stay in touch. Sending out a weekly thought every week that I write, and in any other way that the Meaningful Life Center and myself can help you in your meaningful life journey, finding some meaning, finding your angel within to be able to actualize it in the fullest sense of the word, with the least amount of impediments. So thank you, everyone, and I'll see you next week,
Rabbi,
online or here in this room.
Rabbi, would you comment on what is Paris still burning after a week? Last week.
I wrote about it last week, right?
Yeah. Has there been since then? Has there been any change?
You mean in the news? I think things have not changed. You're dealing with an insidious force that, frankly, let's be honest, it didn't go away after September 11th. Just because we killed bin Laden, it didn't mean that it's over. Whatever the forces of attack, I mean, this is really not for now. I definitely have, if you send me an email, I could send you a series of articles besides this Paris burning and others, that it's part of a pattern that we have to discover, that ultimately the war is going to be in the schools, in the Muslim schools, where they're training their children. Because you can eliminate every terrorist that exists right now, or whatever you want to call them, but if they're educating these children with an attitude that calls the West a decadent force of the devil, or whatever they call the Crusader Zionist plot, then that's an education system that is continuously producing new recruits. Now, I'm not suggesting, I'm the last one to suggest, by me, any innocent person dies is a tragedy, Jew or non-Jew, Palestinian or Arab, it doesn't make a difference. And I'm not suggesting 1.8 billion Muslims all are of this mindset. But frankly, that's the breeding ground. That's where it's coming from. And just like the Christians in the 17th century and earlier terrorized the world, now it's essentially, my feeling is that the Muslims are where the Christians were like in the 17th century or something. Now, we don't have to wait 3 centuries. We have to wake them up. What was it? Who was the General Schwarzkopf, right? Was the general in Iraq? 91. Desert Storm. So they said to him, so what are you doing? You playing God and judge? He says, no, I'm only here to arrange the appointment. God is the judge, but I'll arrange the appointment. We have to make sure to arrange the appointment between, look, they're children of Abraham. Abraham prayed for infidels. They just don't know how to do that. So much more to be said on this. I don't think anything's changed at all. If anything, it's becoming more and more apparent that we're dealing with a serious issue. The word serious is almost a ridiculous statement. It's more than serious. It's a World War III in a different way. It's just not with hundreds of thousands of soldiers on front lines in Europe and in Russia. But it's a World War III in a certain way. And unfortunately, our leaders, I don't want to get into detail, as we know. Just check out what they're saying, how they're thinking about it. They won't even acknowledge the enemy. So, but I'm positive. We as Jews have survived it all. We got to take a positive attitude. As I said, I've talked about this. If any of you want to see links, I've spoken many talks on this, written many articles. Now, let's we're focusing on what we focused, but I didn't want to ignore it as well because it's obviously a very compelling topic, and so may the world finally find real world peace, and especially in Israel and all people in the world. Thank you very much.